Be live. So we can still say Shabbat Shalom for a few more moments as we gather together at the end of Shabbat to savor these last little bits. And so we will um, savor it with a story from Rabbi Rachel and then be ready to make Havdalah together.
Thank you. One thing that I'm starting to note, because I've been using stories from a different book, we had this once before where there's some stories that have great similarities to them, but they end up with enough differences that it actually feels like a different story. So this is actually close to something that I started with one aspect of it, but it has a really, really different kind of ending at the end. So say, I don't know if anybody here remembers the original story, but I'm not going to tell you enough to anything about it because it would ruin it. So anyway, where we start is there was a Moroccan king who loved justice. He really wanted to know what the people in his kingdom were thinking because he really wanted to make their lives better. He wanted to make sure that everybody was happy with what was going on in the kingdom. But he was smart enough to know that if he went and asked people, I mean, come on, is anybody going to tell the king, no, it's lousy, we don't like what you're doing? Oh, please, no one is going to do that. They just don't do that with a king. So what he decided to do was disguise himself as a poor beggar and go for a walk around the town and try to find somebody who would talk to him, not knowing that he's the king, would tell him the truth. So he went and he walked by, and he was walking by a small cottage, and he heard a man playing an oud and singing, and it sounded so beautiful. The person sounded so joyous that he couldn't resist, and he went over and knocked on the door. And the music stopped, and young man came. David opened the door and said, hello. And the king said, is a guest welcome in your house? Now remember, he was dressed up. The king is a poor beggar. So that's what David saw, was a poor beggar standing at his door, not the king. But David, being a nice person, invited him into dinner. David recited over the blessing over the bread, and they began to eat. And when they were done, he started playing again and singing. And the king started to ask him about his life. And David said, I'm a cobbler. During the day, I repair people's shoes. When I earn enough money for my food, I go to the marketplace and just buy what I need, and that's it. Well, what about tomorrow? Asked the king. Don't you worry, will you have enough tomorrow? I have faith, David said, that all will be well tomorrow too. Blessed be God, day by day. When they bid each other good night, the king, again dressed as a beggar, said, may I come again? And David said, a good guest is always welcome. So the king returned to the palace and thought, I'm going to test this man's faith. So he sent out a proclamation that no one could hire a cobbler who didn't have a special permit given by the king. So the next day, David realized he wasn't going to be able to earn any money because he didn't have a special permit. So he decided to draw water from a well instead. And doing that, he earned enough to buy his food. And again, he did the same thing that he always would do, which was buy his food, get enough money for food, buy it, and go home. So the king, once again dressed as a beggar, came to David's cottage, figuring he's going to be miserable. He's not going to have any food. How will we ever have any food to share? So he was surprised, though, to find that David had a table filled with food. After eating, David began to play his oud again and sing. And the king listened for a while and then asked David about his day. He said, well, today was a strange day. I told you yesterday that I work as a cobbler, but I couldn't do that today because I didn't have the special permit that the king required. So I drew water instead. What will happen, the king asked, if the king forbids someone from drawing water for anyone else? David answered, blessed be God, day by day. So, of course, once again, the king decides to test David's faith and sends out an order that no one can buy water from anyone who drew it from wells. They could only draw water for themselves. Again, David found that he needed to find another type of work, so he decided to become a wood chopper and sold wood to people. That night, the king, again dressed as a beggar, arrived at David's house and, to his surprise, found David ready to sit down to his usual feast. When he asked David how work had been, David replied that he worked as a wood chopper. "What if the king forbids anyone from chopping wood for others? Then what will you do?" asked the king. "Blessed be God day by day," David said, and began to continue his singing. The next day, the king ordered that all the wood choppers had to report to the palace to serve as palace guards. David came to the palace and was given a uniform and a sword and told to stand guard. That evening, when David went to collect his payment for the day's work, he was told that a special order had come down by the king that all guards could only be paid at the end of a week's time. Oh no, what was he going to do? How would he buy food for dinner all this week because he didn't have any extra money? Suddenly, David had an idea. He decided to pledge the metal blade of the sword in exchange for food. When he received his wages at the end of the week, then he would pay the money back and reclaim the sword. That way no one would ever have a clue about what he'd done. So as soon as David returned home, he carved a wooden blade and connected it to the handle of his sword. Then he placed it in its scabbard, and it looked like a regular sword because the handle still was a regular handle of a sword. "No one will suspect that it's not a real sword of steel," he said to himself with a laugh. So as David was about to sit down to dinner, he heard a knock at the door again, and of course it was the same poor man who'd been visiting him all week, the king in disguise. Once again, David welcomed him in and invited the man to eat with him. And of course, the king was very surprised to see the delicious food on the table, but he waited until after dinner to ask David how he earned money that day. David told his guests that he'd become part of the king's guard. "Well, since I won't receive any pay until the end of the week, I pledged the steel blade of my sword and carved a wooden one in its place." The king laughed at the clever deception and asked, "What will you do if the sword's inspected tomorrow?" David said, "Blessed be God, day by day." With that, the king bid David a good night and went back to the palace. Now, the king decided he was going to see just how clever David was and called David the next day when all the guards were there in the palace to his throne. Now, the king knew who David was, obviously, but David didn't recognize the king because he'd always come in enough disguise that there was no way to tell that this was the same poor beggar who he'd been feeding every night. The king said to David, "Here is a man who has been found guilty of a terrible crime, and he's been sentenced to death. I choose you as the guard who must carry out his punishment with your sword, and it must be done in front of the whole court." David said, "Please, your majesty, I've never killed anyone in my life. I can't do this terrible deed." And the commander of the army said, "It's the king's orders. Carry out the order." David began to tremble and pray. He didn't know what to do, but he knew he had to do something quickly. Suddenly, he grabbed the handle of the sword in its sheath and spoke in a gruff, quivering voice, almost as if someone else was speaking through him. He said, "Creator of the universe, you know I've never shed another man's blood. You know I've never even used a sword. I don't want to kill anyone. But as is the king ordered, I will make an agreement with you. If this man is really guilty, let my blade be made of steel. However, creator of the universe, if the man is innocent, then please return my steel blade to wood." All the people held their breath as David slowly started to draw his sword from his sheath. The crowd gasped in amazement when they saw the sword was made of wood. The king immediately ordered the release of the prisoner. Then, with a hearty laugh, he got up from the throne and went to David and embraced him. The king said, "I now see that your faith is truly strong and how it helps you through difficult times." He then revealed that he had been the beggar who had been coming all the other nights. The king appointed David as his wise advisor, and they remained honest friends from that day on. And David, of course, continued to say every day, "Blessed be God," day by day. So that was a little different from the version that we read before, which was somebody kind of fooling the king. But I kind of liked this one. I thought that was pretty darn clever of a way to pull the sword out. So that is our story for tonight.
Thank you.
And I want to explain why I disappeared. I got a FaceTime call from my Canadians. So I was on the phone with them.
There you go. Well, that's good.
Let you get
That's
away
where I
with that.
was.
Well, good. Good.
Yeah.
Well, I have a little one was down. I had to lean down to keep her calm, but it's gotten quieter here now, so she's not as concerned about the weather as she was before. So I tried to move the camera a little bit, but it was a little hard to do. So I was here, but just at a different angle.
Ow. Ow.
Okay, and we will be ready momentarily for Havdalah. So hopefully you have everything together that you're going to need. And again, if you don't have a Havdalah candle, if you don't have, you can drink something else. And for spices, it can be anything that you want to smell that is a pleasant smelling scent or aroma to savor as we move into the week ahead. We light our candles, and then we begin with Kiddush over the wine.
Doesn't want to light.
I can't see when they're all lit or not, so I will trust you for that part. Actually, I'm going to try to move this camera down a little bit so you can see the Kiddush cup in the flame. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen borei peri hagafen. We get our spices. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei minei v'samim borei minei v'samim. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei meorei ha'esh borei meorei ha'esh. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamavdil ben kodesh l'chol ben or lechoshech ben yom hashvi'i לששת ימי המעשה. ברוך אתה אדוני המבדיל בין קודש לחול. We savor this moment together for just a little bit longer. And then when we're ready, put your candle out in your wine or juice. Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu Hagiladi, B'meira v'yameinu, Yavo Eleinu, Imashiach ben David, Imashiach ben David, Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu Hagiladi. I invite you to unmute so we can together sing Shavua Tov to wish one another a good week and to enjoy the week as it moves us forward and come back together for Shabbat again next week. Shavua Tov.
Shavua
Shavuot
Shavua
Tov.
Shavua Tov,
Shavua
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 Tov, Shavua
Shavua
Tov, Shavua Tov.
Good
Good
week,
week,
a week
a
of
week,
peace, big gladness reign,
rain
and
and
joy
joy increase.
increase. A
A
good
good week,
week, a
a
week
week
of
of
peace,
peace,
big
may
gladness
gladness
reign, and
and
joy
joy
increase.
increase.
We wish everyone a Shavua Tov, and we wish those people on Facebook a good week, and we'll see you next week, either Saturday night for Havdalah or Friday night for Shabbat.